Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Robert Barr, and I'm pleased that you're joining me and one another for this streaming Shabbat service. We are living in challenging and difficult times, and this is a moment for us to pause, to catch our breath, to think about where we've been, and to think about where we're going, for the days flow into one another without interruption. Time races on. The Sabbath is our means to divert time, a stepping off point, pausing with friends and loved ones to observe, then rejoice in the wonder-filled coincidence of living. There can be a sense of pleasure in every given breath, blessed with taste to savor and warmth to give and to receive, bestowed with gifts of sight and sound. We are obliged to cherish and revel in each smile, in every musical note. The Sabbath also awakens us to the silence between notes. It speaks of contemplation, the quiet delight of literature, of unhurried walks, of rare conversation. The Sabbath can be our interlude, our ritual pause in this lively current, our signal to step more lightly, to appreciate more profoundly, to dive more deeply into the questions that life is asking. Again, I'm Rabbi Robert Barr of Congregation Beth Adam. That's our bricks and mortar congregation here in Loveland, Ohio. That's part of Greater Cincinnati and our Jewish community. That's our online initiative, which we began over 15 years ago. Being online allowed us to remain connected with members who moved to different cities. It allowed us to meet people who lived around the country and around the world who wanted to be a part of our community. It allowed us to remain connected during the pandemic. This technology has been important, but we need to remember that it's just technology. It isn't the purpose. It allows us to communicate, but our purpose is what we have been doing here for over 40 years at Congregation Beth Adam. Our purpose has been to give voice to a bold, dynamic Judaism. Here at Congregation Beth Adam, we recognize we are not our ancestors. We don't need to mimic them or parrot them. We need to create anew. They created Jewish ideas and values reflective of who they were and of their time. We need to create a Judaism that is reflective of who we are, informed by the knowledge that we had that our ancestors didn't have access to, informed by our understanding of our place in the universe. At Congregation Beth Adam, we've been recreating liturgy. The services that we read this evening reflects these new ideas, and you're a part of this community. It affects how we teach in our religious school. Recreating a Judaism that's bold and dynamic is our responsibility, and that's what we're doing here, and that's what you're a part of this evening. Because we're online, it affords us some opportunities, allows folks to chat with one another. I know on bethadam.org, people are chatting, which is always good. Always want people to be respectful. But if you don't like the chatting so much, you can always watch our service on one of our Facebook pages, on our Jewish community, or on bethadam.org, our Facebook pages, and you can watch and you can leave a message. Please let us know where you're participating from. It also means, because we're online, I can record a conversation earlier, which I did with Rabbi Shapiro, who's going to be our guest later on. And it also means you don't have to watch our service when we stream it at 7 o'clock. You can watch it whenever it is convenient for you. Technology affords us multiple possibilities, but ultimately it's what we say with the technology that is most important and most essential. Now we're going to continue our service with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. The candles of Shabbat stand before us, waiting to meet the flame, longing to share their warmth, ready to shed their light. Like those who came before us, like all people, we find comfort in fear and flame, endless swirl of fascination, mystery, and awe. Like those who came before us, like all people, we are graced with the desire and the will to understand. So we continue our ancestors' search for answers, pushing away the darkness of ignorance. The flames they saw as magic and beyond comprehension became flames of knowledge and hope. But still, we look with wonder inspired by their beauty and power. We embrace the flames of Shabbat. We embrace the light, our vessel of mystery and understanding. As we light our Shabbat candles, we celebrate our journey, our quest, our moments of peace. May the light of our people shine. May the light of Shabbat cast its warmth in our homes. May these candles burn with respect for all who push beyond the bonds of ignorance, for all who seek justice, for all who build community. May these candles burn with the memory of all who came before us. May we draw on the many ways our people have given voice to their ideas and their values. And may we add our own insight to their glow. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or ba'shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. A recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling has reverberated across our country. Rabbi Rabbis Shapiro, colleague and friend, had an opportunity to discuss that ruling and how the one specific judge quoted or misquoted Bible in order to support his position. This is our conversation. So those who've joined us before know Rabbi Rabbis Shapiro, friend, colleague, who I have known since 1976. This year, we're spending a lot of time discussing what we've seen in the rabbinate over the past 40 plus years. But tonight, I want to turn our attention to something that happened just recently and have a discussion with Rabbi Shapiro, with Rami, about the Supreme Court ruling that came out of Alabama on February 16th. A ruling that declared frozen embryos in that state to be unborn children for the purposes of civil liability under Alabama's wrongful death statute. That's a fancy way of saying they declared frozen embryos equal to a human being, and it threw into chaos the whole conversation there about IVF. And what I'm particularly interested in talking to Rami about is Tom Parker. He is the Supreme Court justice who issued a separate opinion supporting the idea that frozen embryos are in fact human beings. And he quoted a lot from Bible, and it's an area that Rabbi Shapiro has a lot of expertise in. So Rami, I know you've read the opinion and you read some of the quotes. So what were some of your impressions about how Justice Parker quoted the Bible, or maybe misquoted the Bible?
Yeah, so thanks. This is a good conversation. I think this is really important. Let's just be clear that my expertise is not in IVF.
Okay, right.
I have no experience. Right. I wasn't born in a test tube. I never had babies that way. But I'm fascinated by some people's use of the Bible to make law in what's supposed to be a secular democracy.
Right.
And then, we'll get to the specifics in a second, but it's not unique to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's a worldwide phenomenon. The same thing is going on in India, because I always have this fascination with India, and it's Hindu nationalists' turn, where they've just opened up in early, I think the end of January, this temple to Ram,
right,
which is supposedly built on the birthplace of Ram, the god Ram. His birthplace was under a mosque, and they demolished the mosque, and then they built this huge temple.
Right.
And there's this whole mythology around it, and they're using that to promote essentially an anti-Muslim turn in Indian democracy. I mean, it's not a democracy. It's becoming an authoritarian Hindu state. Mm-hmm. So, and you see the same thing playing out in Israel. You see the same thing playing out in Islamic countries that run on Sharia. So this is something, and I'd like to get your take on this, maybe even before we get into the specifics. There's something about human beings.
Okay, that narrows it down.
Right. Let's narrow it down. There's something about humans that we need some kind of authoritative text or guru or, some, even though we know it's a person like Prime Minister Modi or Trump or a rabbi or whatever it is, we know they're human, but we give them superhuman authority. We just can't handle freedom. Eric Fromm wrote a book called Escape from Freedom, maybe in the 70s or so.
Right.
We just can't handle freedom. And it's just too much for us. So we take refuge in whatever religious text we follow and give that the authority so that we don't have to think. And I don't think it's a Christian thing or a Jewish thing. I think it's a human thing. Humans don't want to think.
Well, I don't know.
With the exception of the two of us. So what do you think?
Of course. But you look at the American Revolution and some of the idea, sort of the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment and the Enlightenment. I think there was a break from that kind of authoritarianism and authoritative text. I think that's why it was frightening for a lot of folks. And my sense today is people don't they don't understand how oppressive the world was or is when authoritative ancient texts are used to create structure. So I think people are willing to accept it, not understanding how devastating it will be. I'm giving people different credit. I'm giving them more credit, I suppose. I think if people understood that ancient texts they're being weaponized, whether they're being weaponized in India or weaponized here to oppress people by quoting particular verses, oftentimes only a passage of the verse, and always to support what the person quoting believes. I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, I read the text and I realized I was wrong." They always right. They always read the text and go, "Oh, see, I'm right."
Right. The belief comes first, then they make the text fit it, which is exactly what Chief Justice Parker did in the Alabama case. So he rests his entire position on the personhood of these frozen embryos on two texts. I mean, there may be more, but really, there's just two.
The big ones,
The big ones. And I think we'll bring in some other ones. But the first one is, he says, people are made in the image of God, and these embryos are people. So he rests it on Genesis, first chapter of Genesis, verse 27. In verse 26, God says, let's make the human beings in the image of God. And then he, because it's a he in the story, I don't believe in this God, but just living with the story. So in the story, he says, let us make the human being in our image. And then in verse 27, Genesis 1:27, God makes human beings in God's image, male and female. So right away, God's image. So I mean, God is male and female. So either God's, hermaphroditic, or, there's all kinds of androgyny there. Who knows what they're talking about? But the idea from Justice Parker's point of view is that shows that people are made in the image of God. The problem is the people that are made in Genesis 1 are adults.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's no embryos.
Right.
God doesn't make embryos and they all just fall to earth, pop, they all just fall on the ground. And what happens to them? They would be dead. There's no fetuses in Genesis 1:27.
Right.
They're fully formed human adults. So if you want to take the text literally, right? If you want to take it as at face value,
which
and
neither
say
of us do, but if you're going to read it, this is the problem. If you're going to read it like it's written versus how you would like it to be written.
Right, which they don't, and when they muck with it, they do it so beautifully. It's great, which I'll get to in a second, which we'll get to in a second. But right here, he just says, people are created in the image of God, adult people, not fetuses. So right away, he's bonkers on that. If you go to a text he didn't quote, which is the second chapter of Genesis, where the Adam, the first human being, is created from Adamah, the earth. So again, God doesn't take the earth and make a little embryo from the earth. No, it doesn't do that. God creates this being, which later God separates into two. So again, maybe it's an androgynous being. Some rabbinic texts say it's male on one side and female on the other side, and then God separates them. But however you want to read the story, God makes one of these things, but not an embryo, not a fetus, a full human being, takes that human being and plops the Adam into the garden to protect and to serve it. Right? Now, if we're talking about embryos, unless the embryo has a little tiny gardener tools, the embryo isn't going to be doing anything.
But wouldn't they say, I'll play Judge Parker for a second. Rabbi Shapiro, come on, you're being silly right now. Well, you know that the text, what it was saying was human beings are in the image of God. And for the first ones, he had to create them as adults, but that was the exception, not the rule. So your point, interesting, but inaccurate.
Okay, you win. Luckily for you, I've read another verse. So the first time that the Bible, the Torah really, talks about a fetus is in the second chapter of Exodus. Mm-hmm. And then you get this, it's in verses 22 and 23. You get this, probably what's a hypothetical legal case that's, thrown around in the Bible. And the case is, you have two people, and this is not like a real thing. They're just spinning like, oh, what if, right? So what if two men are fighting in the proximity of a pregnant woman? And one of the men hurts the woman, knocks into her, knocks her over. We don't know exactly what happens. But somehow this woman who's not involved in the fight is injured by the fighting.
That results in a miscarriage.
Miscarriage, right? So she loses her baby. What's the penalty? Well, there's no argument in the text. The penalty is laid out. This is where you get, the an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The penalty is a fine, a monetary fine. The fetus, the unborn baby, is considered property. Now, it's not the woman's property because the woman herself is property. She's owned by her husband. So the baby, the unborn baby, is owned by her husband. So whoever caused the miscarriage has to pay a fine to the woman's husband. There's no talk about, Justice Parker uses the phrase, the wrath of the holy God. Right. There's no mention of God in the story at all. It's just a legal case. And God isn't mad because God doesn't care about embryos and fetuses. The fetus is lost. A fine is adjudicated.
Right.
And that's the end of the story. But it says, what if the damage to the woman is more severe? Not only does the unborn child die, but the woman dies. Now it changes altogether. Now it's a homicide because the woman is an adult. So if you want to say that an adult is made in the image of God, though the Bible doesn't claim, in this case, they don't bring God into it.
Right.
But if the adult is the image of God, and here you've taken the life of an adult woman, now you have a capital case. And the punishment is, in fact, death. And this is where you get an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. So if she loses an eye, then the other guy loses
So the biblical authors are recognizing distinction between adults and a fetus. They're not the same. They're categorically different. They have different status. And so the argument that when it says in Genesis, created in God's image, they meant adults because they understood that adults were different than a fetus. And because we see it in the book of Exodus, they make that distinction. So
I think go ahead.
So, this is the challenge. I think, when you analyze the text, you're looking at what the text says rather than what you want it to say. You're trying to look at the logical, if you can say logical for the text oftentimes, because it's mythic and there's lots of spaces missing, but you're looking at the statements they made and piecing them together in a coherent manner rather than trying to promote a particular theological position or legal position in order to justify saying that IVF and those frozen embryos have a particular status, and they can't, and those frozen embryos are in fact equal to an adult person.
Yeah, remember, I mean, I love these terms, exegesis and eisegesis. Now, exegesis is when you try to figure out what the text says. Eisegesis, or in the case of Chief Justice Parker, I see Jesus, which is probably what he's doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Eisegesis is when you have an idea and you read it into the text. Now, you know, one person's exegesis could be another person's eisegesis and vice versa. But it's so blatant here what he's doing. And it's not just him. It's the Supreme Court. And in a second, he's going to claim it's the entire Alabama legislature. But he starts from the premise that the fetus is, or the embryo is, an ensouled being.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's why it's a person.
Right. Let's leave that for a minute. I think we're not going to have time to get into everything. I'm going to.
Well, we have to make time because that's his other text, Jeremiah 1:5.
Right. We need, because we wanted. Why don't we talk real? Can you? That was the other text real quickly. Can you mention Jeremiah?
Yeah. So Jeremiah 1:5, what it says, actually, it says, God says to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you and made you a prophet to the nations. Now, Parker wants to say that God knew you in the womb, and that's why you're a person. But what the text says is before I formed you in the womb, before you were a fetus, before you were an embryo, God knew you. So he's talking about something metaphysical, not something physical. And so if Jeremiah, first of all, he's just talking about Jeremiah. What Parker says is, I'm going to quote this. He says, the people of Alabama took what was spoken of the prophet Jeremiah and applied it to every unborn person in this state. In other words, every unborn Alabaman is a prophet, which is absurd.
Right. And
also he claims that the legislature of Alabama or the people of Alabama have the power to change God's will, which is, it's absurd on its face, but that's what they're doing. But the meaning of the text, whether you accept it or not is another thing, but the meaning of the text is that Jeremiah pre-exists in some metaphysical way the physical body. So if the embryo is destroyed, Jeremiah isn't destroyed.
Sure.
Because he existed before that. So his whole argument is absurd from the texts that he quotes to give it some kind of sanction. It makes no sense.
Right, but as you said at the outset, there is weight that is given to sacred ancient texts. It is given an authority and a power, and even if it's misused or misunderstood by lots of people, because I'm sure the people who read it said, oh, he quoted Jeremiah. So this is proof that his argument is true.
It's like when Trump held up a Bible upside down and people said, oh, it's a Bible. It must be read. This is important.
Right. We give,
performance.
Well, and not just Trump, I think it's important to say, we have presidents swear the oath of office on a Bible. I mean, I've actually given sermons that the president shouldn't, but they do that because there's an implicit belief that somehow that book that has power and meaning, and when someone places his or her hand on it, whether as a presidential inauguration, or they don't really do it in courts of laws anymore, but they sort of see that in TV shows a lot, that somehow when you put your hand on the Bible and you say, I will tell the truth, there's a power and an authentic, it's authoritative, and it will happen because there's the wrath of God. this is, it's frustrating to me that we allow this ancient text to continue to have such dominance on complex issues that our ancestors had no understanding of. I mean, they had bits and glimpses of it, but they were living in a different world. There was no way we could go back to the ancient writers of the text and say, you know what, there's a way now for people to have children, and it includes fertilization of the egg outside the womb and placing those few cells that have begun to develop, putting them in deep freeze for an extended period of time, and later, some point later, they can be implanted, and then there'll be a child. They would have no idea what we're talking about.
Right. But I just want to put in, I mean, you're talking about correctly about sacred texts. There are people who waive the Constitution who have never read it. Right. And they just say, in the Constitution, it says, and then they make up stuff that the Constitution doesn't say. But they waive the book, and everyone goes, oh, master, it's in there. Again, back to the very opening of our conversation, people don't want to think. I'm a little stronger on this than you are. Right. I don't think people want to think. They don't want to know. They don't want to read. They don't want to investigate for themselves. They want to be told. And if someone waives a Bible, a Constitution, a Bhagavad Gita, or whatever it's going to be, people are just going to go, oh, fine, just don't make me think.
Well, there certainly is a desire not to have any nuance. That we see all the time, that people don't want to, they're willing to take it at face value versus digging into the text more and understanding. And the other reality, and it goes both to the Constitution, certainly to the Constitution, is what our ancestors, what those people wrote, also changes as we interpret and we have new information. There's this debate about originalism. What did they mean exactly when they wrote it versus how has it evolved over centuries? What does it mean to us today? So using sacred text, I guess, we know it. We've given sermons for most of our lives. When you quote something, it often is it's a showstopper. If you quote a text, people go, oh, it must be true because it says it in a particular text, rather than using logic, accepting the logic behind why we hold a particular position.
Yeah. And then there's this sort of I don't know, you might say the opposite phenomenon where people are bombarded with competing truths. So they get to the point where they go, well, nothing is true then.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter. Nothing is true. I think it's a Russian proverb. Nothing is true and everything is possible. So I give up. I mean, that's sort of like Vladimir Putin's approach. Just flood the market with BS. You don't know what's going on. And just change your propaganda every 5 minutes. And people go, I don't know what's true. I don't care. I'm just gonna, drink. Well, that's all I got left.
And so we have to pull it together. The challenge, I think, by raising that sort of at the end, is we do have a responsibility to really investigate and to listen. But I'm glad you shared your sort of the insights into the text with us, because right now we are living in a time when there are folks who want to impose their religious viewpoint on our nation. And they do it frequently and effectively, unfortunately, by quoting the Bible. And I wanted to spend time with you this evening helping people to see the complexity of the Bible and how, if you really look at it, it frequently does not say what people who are quoting it claim it says. And that's
Absolutely.
What I want to.
If you want to know what the Bible says, you ask Bob and I.
And we will. And on that note, we're going to have to end, because we could keep on going and on this conversation for hours. And I have a sense after we stop our recording, we will go on for a few more hours. So, Rami, thanks for being with us this evening.
Always happy to talk with you.
I always find it valuable to speak with Rabbi Shapiro. Rami has unique insights, and he brings a level of knowledge and expertise to our conversation. What happened in Alabama will continue to reverberate around our nation. We all need to give voice to our religious perspective and our values. This is not a time for silence. This is a time for us to be engaged in a critical question that our nation is wrestling with. It is difficult, it is challenging, it is affecting people's lives. Now is the time to be involved. Now is the time to give voice to what we believe. Now is the time to be engaged in this critical moment in our nation's history. We're going to continue now with the sharing of wine or juice. Life is a wondrous gift. The mind observes with awe, and appreciation flows from the heart. Life's joyful bounties are unveiled. Such treasures abound in ordinary moments. A familiar face, the simplicity of a smile, tender kisses, the warmth and security of a hug, enchanting melodies, the grace of dance, the coolness of sculpted marble, a remarkable story. The complexity of atomic structure, thunder's reverberation, the shimmering of a rainbow, intoxicating rose petals. These moments become opportunities to affirm that which is good. As we lift the cup, a tribute to life's enchantments, may we find joy and contentment in our human endeavor. Ruchim chachayim ba'olam, blessed is the life within the world. Ruchim chachayim ba'adam, blessed is the life within each person. And we say, l'chaim, to life. I always encourage you to go to bethadam.org. That is our homepage, our website. There you will find a calendar of upcoming events, our Shabbat services, whether they're streaming like we did tonight, or our hybrid services, which are a combination of people here in our library and on Zoom, or our adult education, which again, those are hybrid as well. So you go to bethadam.org and you'll find out about upcoming events. And if you need a link, then you contact our congregational office. Also on our homepage is the conversation that I recorded with Rabbi Lauren Werber. Rabbi Werber is succeeding me as the next Rabbi Chief Executive. She will be replacing me starting August 1st, and it's very exciting, and I wanted to have a conversation with her, and we were able to share it online. I had shared it during a Friday night service, but maybe you didn't see it. So just go to our homepage, and you'll see it in one of the blue boxes. You click on Watch, it'll pop up, and you can hear our conversation. I'm sure you'll be as excited as I am that she will be leading the congregation as we move into the future. Now we continue our service with the closing words, words that we say every week. May we know blessings those who are near, and may we know blessings those who are far. May the Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. May we know blessings today, and may we know blessings through the night. May health be for our children and for all people, and all things soon be right. May we know blessings that are comings, and may we know blessings when we depart. May we live each day with peace and wisdom in each heart. Ken Yehi, let it be. Shabbat Shalom.